Welcome to the Queer Spirituality Podcast. What if queerness wasn't something that needed to be tolerated or accepted? What if queerness is the greatest spiritual gift? For millennia, queer people have been trailblazers. We've shaped culture through art, fashion, music, and more. We've explored the meaning of gender, sexuality, family, and beauty. Queer people see the possibilities of what can be beyond what currently exists. I'm your host, Julian Crosson-Hill, and each episode is an invitation to embrace the sacredness of being queer, an invitation to practice authenticity as a spiritual path, and an invitation to drink from the collective wisdom when we live together in community. Through each episode, we'll explore how the special gifts of queer people can help us flourish and how they help transform the world around us. Where you are in your spiritual journey doesn't matter. You could be rediscovering spirituality. You might be seeking deeper meaning. You may be looking for a community of soul friends or wanting to live more as yourself. Wherever you are, you're in the right place. Hello, and welcome to this episode. I'm so excited to be back doing this podcast. And for those of you who are new listeners, welcome to the podcast. For those of you who have listened to the Queer Spirituality podcast for a while, I'm sure you've noticed there was kind of a long gap here. I spent some time figuring some things out in my business and the way that I wanted to put my work out in the world, who I wanted to really focus on, and how I could kind of have the biggest impact. And sometimes when you take a break, it just kind of starts to spiral a little bit, and it takes a little longer and a little longer. And before you knew it, quite a bit of time had gone by. So I'm excited to be back. And I kind of think about this as a reboot in a lot of ways. And, who doesn't love a reboot? If you've followed me for a while, I'm a big science fiction fan. And one of my favorite all-time reboots is the Battlestar Galactica reboot, which just really took the original and elevated it to a whole new level. It also really changed the story in a fundamental way. And that's how I've been thinking about this podcast, is not so much in changing the story dramatically, but really refocusing it a little bit. And so as we go forward, you've probably seen there's new cover art, there's a new theme song, there's new opening, everything's kind of feels new and fresh and rebooted. But at the core, we're still talking about queer spirituality, and in particular, this idea that queerness is sacred, that it is a divine gift that provides certain talents, certain gifts for certain characteristics to queer people that are really valuable and necessary and needed in the world. And so as we move forward with the Queer Spirituality podcast, I'm still going to be bringing the same high quality guests, people who have just amazing experiences in spirituality, lots to say, lots of ideas about how spirituality connects back to our queerness and our authenticity, but just focusing in a lot more on this idea of queerness is sacred and authenticity as a spiritual path, and really talking a lot more in depth with my guests about the ways that their spirituality and their queerness intersect, and how they bring their gifts as a queer person to the world, and how spirituality improves their life as a queer person. So lots of exciting new things. I've already recorded a number of new episodes with a whole slate of new guests, and continually just finding really interesting people to talk to. So lots of great things coming. Let's dive into today's topic, though, which I really want to talk about this idea of community. And, spiritual communities are such an integral part of practicing any type of spiritual practice. Having people who believe the same way you do, or that you have a common vocabulary with, can be such a powerful thing. And someone that I recently interviewed for this podcast, and that episode will be coming out in the future, in their book, they talk a little bit about community and how radically different, as like a pagan, or a witch, raising energy as an individual, how different it is from raising energy in a group. And I think that's a really important point. And I think a lot of us want community, say we want community, but there's sometimes this disconnect. And as I was thinking about that, I really started to think about a book I read recently and I reviewed on my blog called The Soul Beneath the Skin, by David Nimmons. And The Soul Beneath the Skin, this book really was an attempt by David Nimmons to talk about what these queer gifts are. And he talks about a lot of really wonderful traits that, and this book is focused on gay men. And as you know, I've said many times that while this podcast is about queer spirituality, my lived experience is as a gay man. So often I relate a lot of my stuff to gay men because that's where I have the experience, and where I'm out of my depth is obviously the lived experience of lesbians, bisexual men, um, transgender people, non-binary people. And that's where my guests are so meaningful because they bring these different perspectives in, and we find those commonalities in the ways that we approach our spirituality. So getting back to the book, I got off on a tangent there. um, the Soul Beneath the Skin really talks about these gifts that gay men have. He talks about gay men being peaceful, that, and he shows a bunch of statistics from police departments and crime statistics about how gay bars have less police calls for fights or violent acts than straight bars do. He talks about nurturing and the way that gay men took care of each other during the AIDS crisis. He talks about the ways that we explore what family means, and we build chosen families and build these friendships and relationships and communities that reflect who we are and reflect our authenticity. And he talks about also the way that our sexual relationships, sometimes we experiment with. There's a lot of gay men who are in polyamorous relationships, there's open relationships, there's friends with benefits, there's all these different ways of being intimate with people, of being in relationship and being in community. And these are all really powerful gifts. And then he also talks about something that, has been a joke for among gay men for ages, about just that special connection that there seems to be between gay men and straight women. And ironically, even though my coaching is focused on gay men, I often have straight women who my message resonates with, who are like, can I work with you? And the answer is of course, but it's interesting how this happens. But then what I really enjoyed about The Soul Beneath Our Skin is he talked about all of these beautiful gifts that gay men have, and he called them our private heart, right? Our private heart. This is who we are, on a spiritual level, on a being level. It's about our authenticity. It's about these beautiful divine gifts that we have, that are rooted in who we are as queer people. And then he talks about the clash between our private hearts and our public habits. And I think this is a reality I often hear from especially gay men about. We come together in community, and all these beautiful gifts, they sort of get tucked away or hidden, and we don't really treat each other the way that you would think would be natural or second nature to us based on these gifts. And this is something I hear over and over from gay men, that they don't enjoy the gay community, that they don't like the gay community, that the gay community is this or it's that. And in this book, David talks about a couple of things that happen in community. He talks about the cynicism, after a lifetime of having to hide and mask, and the way that sometimes some men carry still internalized shame around their sexuality, around just the persecution and the constant, like, having to fight for your place at the table, that some gay men become very cynical, and it comes out in this very negative mindset that they bring into community with them that can almost be poisonous to the people around them. He also talks about, the archetype of the bitchy queen, the person who has to take everyone down a notch in community, and how, they kind of act out this way. And I've run into some of those myself. And often what I've noticed is that the more deeply seated the person has a lack of confidence or a lack of self-esteem or has had experiences in their life that make them feel less worthy or less deserving, then these are the people who often tend to step into that archetype of the bitchy queen, and they lash out and uh, insult and mock other people in community in order to make themselves seem bigger or more important than they feel that they are inside. And so we see this happening in the community. And then there's obviously, pressures that happen when queer people come together in community external to who we are, but still impact us. For instance, economic disadvantagement. Um, when you come together in community and you've got a mix of people, particularly in spiritual communities where you may have, white gay men who have high paying jobs and are able to say, let's go take this trip somewhere as a group. And then you've got people who are maybe struggling to meet their basic needs. In that same group, there's this economic disadvantagement that happens, and it can create friction in communities, unfortunately. And that's all completely external to who we are. And it's unfortunate that that kind of plays out or happens. And another factor that comes into impacting how we come together in community is we live in a capitalist society, and the queer community is now seen as a demographic to market to. And so there are lots of things being marketed to us in our communities as well, people wanting to sell us things, and using marketing messages about how we're not sexy enough, or we're not rich enough, or we're not wearing the right clothes or using the right products, and all of these things, which, you know, a lot of traditional marketing is about creating insecurity, and then that insecurity gets acted on inside the community. And so all of this stuff sort of happens. And I think that's why I often hear from gay men that they don't want anything to do with community, that gay community isn't for them. They don't fit in gay community, whatever. I also know that there's possibilities in community that are really beautiful and that people are shutting themselves off from because of these negative experiences that they've had. And the way that I know that these possibilities exist is that for 10 years, I co facilitated the Between the Worlds Men's Gathering, which was a festival for gay and bisexual men exploring alternative spirituality. It was a week long camping festival. I was the co founder, along with Michael Lloyd, the author of The Bowl of Heaven. And he and I started this event, and we ran it for 10 years as co-facilitators, and it was like a week long. We had rituals, we had workshops, we had social events, we had a very full calendar for the week that we were all together. But one of the things that we created as sort of the manifesto of the event was this idea that you leave the bar attitudes at the gate to the event, right? Come in and just be authentically yourself, and let's put all of that stuff aside. And to an extent, people were able to do that. And of course, there were moments and there were certain people that weren't able to do that. And we managed that as co-facilitators. But for the most part, people did do that. And what was amazing was just the power in that community, the love and the support that people showed to one another in that community. And to me, that really signaled the possibilities of what can happen when we do the work necessary to come together in community in that way. And so I started thinking about, what are the things that are getting in the way? Why is it that we struggle to form healthy communities in the queer community? I always turn back to human design when I kind of trying to think through a model of how some of these things work. And of course, in human design, there's the circuitry operates on three different levels: the individual level, the tribal level, and the collective level. And I think that makes a good model, because you have the individual person and their authenticity, and also their gifts, and also some of their issues. And in human design, when they talk about the tribal aspect of the circuitry and they talk about the tribal bargain a lot. And the tribal bargain is basically about what happens when we come into community. We bring our gifts and we give to the tribe, and but there's also some, like, we get something back. Other people are nourishing us and giving to us, but there's also sacrifices that are being made too. There's things that we can't do. We have to, check some things at the door, like some of our hurt and our wounding. We can bring them in the extent that we want people to support us in our healing, but when we bring them in and we act out from them, it becomes sort of toxic to the community. This idea of the tribal bargain of, I give something up in order to, make peace and work in this community, and in return I get all of this good back from the community, and it also creates a space where I can give my good. And then of course those small communities, those tribes, that ripples out into the collective. Basically, once we come together as a community and create healthy communities, we can make a bigger table that includes people even outside of our little queer world. So it really becomes this idea of, individual, tribal, collective. Part of that is we have to kind of think about who we want to be when we go into community. And, you know, this kind of gets into the head versus heart and dynamic of, when we go into community, can we be open hearted? Can we lead from the heart? Can we um, receive other people through our heart as opposed to the head? Can we let ego go as a filter of what we want, what we allow in community, of how we behave and how do we want to show up? And it all comes down to, first of all, I think, the individual level. Everyone says they want community, but not everyone is ready for community. And I think that's the important distinction here, is that if we have unhealed things, if we are carrying internalized shame, if we are struggling with our own self esteem, our own confidence, our own sense of worthiness and deservedness, and we go into community, of course, being in community is going to trigger a lot of these things, and we're going to act out on them. We become the bitchy queen, or we bring our cynicism into the community, or, we bring these things in that can be a wedge that really separates community. And so we have to think about community on the individual level, meaning, am I ready to make that tribal bargain? Have I done the inner work necessary to be a productive member of community? And can I bring community? Can I create community wherever I go? Often, people aren't ready for community because they haven't done this step. And I've had many experiences. In fact, at Between the Worlds, we had an individual, one in particular, who just was really had a lot of baggage that they were bringing into the community. And the way that they were acting out was really embodying that bitchy queen, being sarcastic and putting people down and just really being obnoxious. And it really became very, very toxic to the whole community, to the point that a lot of people left the community as a result. We have to really think about, first of all, as an individual, am I ready, really ready for community? And if I'm not, what do I need to do to be ready to be in community? And then secondly, as a community, we have to think about, how do we deal with people who aren't ready, necessarily fully ready, but can benefit from an experience of community and the support of community? And how do we help them process their internalized shame, their self-esteem issues, all of these things that are getting in their way of being in community with other people, while also creating some guardrails so that they don't poison the community or do harm to the community at the same time. And that's a very delicate balance that we have to find as a community. As I reboot the Queer Spirituality podcast and I talk to all of my future guests, and we explore all of these different beautiful ideas about what it means to be queer and what a divine and beautiful blessing that is, and all of the amazing gifts that we bring. And as we talk about authenticity as a spiritual path and how to be the biggest, brightest, beautiful, most beautiful version of who you are, I want you to think about this this episode in particular as an invitation to think differently about community, to think about the possibilities of what queer community can be, and not to shut yourself off from it because you've had some bad experiences. And also, this is an invitation to do your inner work, to really ask yourself, am I ready to be in community with other people? And what do I need to address that may be triggered when I come into community in a way that I tend to be the toxic influence on the community? And so it's an invitation to really do that reflection and to begin creating that healing for yourself, because we really need community. And one last parting thought. I had a student ask me about community and finding community. And I said, and my advice to them was create community wherever you are. Say hello to people, invite them in, be open-hearted and open to people around you, and you can create community wherever you are. And so community isn't something that you have to go find. It can be something that you build. It's more of something you build. And before you can really effectively build community, you've got to do that work on yourself first so that you're really truly ready for that. I would just want to invite you to think about what could be possible when we come together in community. What wisdom, collective wisdom, is there in our queer spiritual communities? And how can I, as an individual, be ready to really contribute positively to that and also act both as guardrails and a healing influence? Thank you for listening to the Queer Spirituality Podcast. As you move through the world, remember that queerness is sacred and the world needs your gifts. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to subscribe to my email list. Also, consider rating it at your favorite podcast site to help other seekers discover it. Until next time, keep being you and bright blessings.